The last thing my brother said to me before I walked into that ballroom was that I should be grateful they even sent me an invitation. I remember standing in the marble lobby of the Hargrove Grand Hotel, adjusting the strap of my bag, listening to the string quartet drifting through the gilded doors. The wedding had cost my parents $300,000. I knew the exact number because my father had called me 2 weeks prior not to confirm my attendance, not to ask how I was doing, but to remind me that I had contributed exactly nothing to the celebration of my brother's happiness, and that the least I could do was show up and not embarrass them. I told him I would be there. What I did not tell him was why. I pushed through the doors. The ballroom smelled like white roses and old money. Chandeliers dripped crystals over round tables dressed in ivory linen. Guests milled around in tailored suits and floor-length gowns, laughing the way people laugh when they know everyone in the room and none of them have anything to fear. My brother, Daniel, stood near the bar with a champagne flute in one hand and his new wife's waist in the other. He looked exactly like my father at 32. Same jaw, same easy confidence, same way of looking at people like he was already calculating their use to him. His new wife, Serena, spotted me first. Her smile tightened at the corners, the way a rubber band does right before it snaps. She said something into Daniel's ear. He turned. Maya. He said my name the way someone says the word traffic. An inconvenience that exists, unfortunately, and must be acknowledged. You actually came. You invited me? I said. I assumed you wouldn't make the flight. Don't you live in a studio in Austin? He looked past me as if checking whether I had brought someone more interesting. I drove, I said, and smiled. He had no idea what was in my bag. I found my seat at table 14, the table by the emergency exit, near the kitchen, where the acoustics absorbed the sound of clattering plates and you could smell the catering staff's dinner over the floral centerpiece. My parents had arranged the seating. My parents always arranged everything. My mother swept toward me 20 minutes into the cocktail hour, her silver wrap dress catching the light like armor. She kissed the air 2 inches from my cheek, the way she always had, careful not to leave a mark on me or be left with one herself. You look thin, she said, which was her way of saying she had noticed me without committing to an opinion about what she saw. You look wonderful, I said, which was true. My mother had always been beautiful in the way that expensive things are beautiful because of the time and money invested in their upkeep. Your father needs to speak with you after the reception, she said, before the cake. There's something that needs to be handled. I know, I said. She paused, just for a breath. Then she smiled again and floated back toward the head table. She thought I meant I knew there was something to discuss. She didn't know I had read the documents 3 weeks ago. She didn't know I had my own legal team in a hotel suite 4 floors above this ballroom. She didn't know that the reason I drove instead of flew was because I needed the 12 hours alone to decide whether I was actually ready to do this. I was ready. My father found me between the salad course and the entree. He pulled the chair beside mine and sat down without asking. He was a large man, my father. Not physically, he was lean and precise in his movements, but large in the way he took up space, in the way rooms reorganized themselves around his presence. He had run Hargrove Capital Partners for 22 years. He had shaken hands with senators. He had the particular confidence of a man who had never, in his adult life, been told no by anyone who mattered. He had told me no my entire life. I won't waste your time, he said, folding his hands on the table. You know about the restructuring? I know, I said. The board voted last Tuesday. We're consolidating the family equity into a single holding trust. It simplifies the tax structure and protects the legacy for Daniel's children. He paused. All remaining minority shareholders need to sign a transfer agreement by the 1st of the month. I was the only remaining minority shareholder. My grandmother had left me 12% of the company when she died 7 years ago. 12% that my father had been trying to legally absorb back into the family's majority control ever since the will was read. I'll have the papers brought to you tonight, he said. It's a formality. You've never been involved in the business, Maya. You know that. You paint. You do your little creative projects. The shares don't mean anything to you. He said little creative projects the way other people say, unfortunate hobby. They might mean something to me, I said. He looked at me then. Really looked. The way you look at a piece of furniture that has unexpectedly moved on its own. Don't make this complicated. It's Daniel's wedding. Do this for your family. I'll think about it, I said. He left. Across the room, I caught Daniel watching. He looked away first. Before I tell you what I pulled out of that bag later that night, and why my father's attorney called him at 11 p.m., sounding like a man who had just learned the building was on fire, I need you to tell me something in the comments. Have you ever had someone in your life treat your silence like permission? Tell me, because that is exactly what my family had been doing for 27 years. And tonight, I was done being quiet. I had 12% of Hargrove Capital. What my father did not know, what no one in that ballroom knew, was what I had done with the other 88. I did not always have money. I want to be honest about that, because the story is not interesting if I leave that part out. When I was 23 years old, I was waitressing at a diner in Columbus and painting on weekends and doing the quiet math of someone who is always calculating whether they can afford the electricity bill and also eat that week. My grandmother had left me those shares. Yes, but shares in a private family firm pay dividends only when the family decides to release them. My father decided never. He called it reinvestment. I called it a leash. The idea for Lumen Studio came to me on a Tuesday afternoon while I was waiting for a table of 6 to decide between the French toast and the avocado scramble. I had been rejected from 17 design firms in the previous 8 months. Not because my work was bad. 3 of those firms had later used concepts from my portfolio samples without credit or compensation, but because I had no connections, no pedigree, no one to make a call on my behalf. So I stopped waiting for a call. I took $4,000 from my savings. I built a digital design platform that connected independent artists directly with corporate clients, cutting out the agencies entirely. I worked on it from 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. every night for 14 months. I ate a lot of instant ramen. I wore the same 3 sweaters in rotation through an Ohio winter because I had turned the heat down to 58 degrees to save on the gas bill. I remember calling my mother during that winter. I was not asking for money. I want to be clear about that. I was asking for a name. My father knew every creative director in the Midwest. One introduction, one email forwarded, would have opened a door. I wasn't asking for the door to be held open, just to be shown where it was. My mother listened to me explain my business. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Maya, your father and I have discussed this. We don't think it's wise to use the family's professional relationships for a venture that isn't likely to succeed. We have to protect Daniel's future at the firm. You understand?" I said I understood. I hung up, and I sat in my kitchen with the heat at 58 degrees, and I made a decision. I was going to succeed so completely, so entirely, so far beyond anything they had imagined for me, that the day they finally looked directly at what I had built, they would not be able to look away. It took 4 years. Lumen Studio had 400,000 users by the end of year 2. By year 3, we had been acquired by a venture-backed portfolio company at a valuation that made my hands shake when I signed the papers. I rolled the proceeds into 3 strategic investments. One of them, a creative tech holding firm called Meridian Group, had been quietly acquiring distressed equity in mid-sized financial firms for 18 months, including Hargrove Capital Partners. I now owned, through Meridian, 41% of my father's company. Combined with my grandmother's 12, I was the controlling shareholder of Hargrove Capital as of 37 days ago. My father's board did not yet know who Meridian's principal investor was. They knew only that a new stakeholder had emerged and that a shareholder meeting had been requested. I had scheduled it for the Monday after Daniel's wedding. Tonight was the last night my father believed he was in control of anything. I let the reception happen. I watched Daniel and Serena dance their first song. I applauded when they cut the cake. I smiled at cousins I barely knew and made pleasant conversation with my aunt from Scottsdale, who always asked if I was still doing the art thing, as though it were a phase, like braces or bangs. I was patient. I had been patient for years. A little longer was nothing. It was my father who broke first. At 9:45, he appeared at my elbow with a manila folder, and a pen, and a smile that did not reach his eyes. "The ceremony is winding down," he said. "Let's get this done." "Of course," I said. "But I have something for you first." I reached into my bag. He expected me to hand him a signed document. I watched his face in the moment before he understood what he was actually holding. The confusion arrived, first a slight furrow between his brows. Then, as his eyes moved down the first page, the color drained out of his face the way water drains from a bathtub, sudden and complete. It was not a transfer agreement. It was a shareholder notification letter from Meridian Group, formally introducing the principal investor of record and requesting an emergency board session. My name was at the bottom. "This isn't possible," he said. His voice was completely flat, the way voices get when the mind cannot yet process what the mouth is being asked to say. "It's been possible for about 5 weeks," I said. "I wanted to tell you before the board meeting on Monday, out of respect for Daniel's day. I thought you deserved to hear it from me directly." He looked at me. I watched him try to locate the version of me he understood. The struggling artist, the failed daughter, the girl at table 14 by the kitchen exit. He could not find her because she wasn't there anymore. "You used your grandmother's shares as a vehicle," he said slowly, "to establish standing as a known stakeholder, which allowed Meridian to." He stopped. He looked at the letter again. "You planned this." "I planned this," I said. "How long?" "Since the winter you told me you couldn't make a phone call." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The string quartet had switched to something soft and slow. Across the room, Daniel was laughing at something Serena had whispered in his ear. They had no idea. Then my father straightened. I recognized the shift. It was the same shift I had watched him make in boardrooms when a deal went sideways, the moment when he stopped reacting and started calculating. He closed the folder. "You are making a mistake," he said quietly. "You don't have the experience to steward this firm. You'll damage it. You'll damage the family name. And when this falls apart, because it will fall apart, you will have nothing. No company, no family, no support network. You will have burned every bridge for a moment of spite, It's not spite, I said. It's a business decision. You're my daughter. I'm the controlling shareholder of Hargrove Capital, I said. Tonight I'm also your daughter. On Monday I'll be your board chairwoman. But right now, in this room, I am both. And as your daughter, I am telling you that I am not signing those transfer papers. Not tonight. Not ever. He picked up his phone. I thought he was calling his attorney. He was. But that was not all he was doing. What happened next was so deliberate, so surgically precise, that I should have seen it coming. I did not see it coming. My mother appeared from the direction of the coat check. Daniel and Serena moved away from the dance floor. Serena's brother, a corporate attorney named Grant, who had been introduced to me at the rehearsal dinner as someone very useful to have around, materialized from behind a pillar with the particular calm of a man who has been waiting in position. Daniel's wedding gift from us, my father said, was a full transfer of his vested equity stake into a protected marital trust, which he and Serena signed this morning. He let that land. That trust is governed by a 3-party agreement requiring unanimous consent for any major shareholder action, including the calling of an emergency board session. I felt the first cold thread of understanding. Serena's brother drafted the agreement, my father continued. Grant, would you like to explain the consent clause? Grant stepped forward with the ease of someone explaining a wine list. Any shareholder action requiring board ratification must be approved by all parties to the Hargrove Family Trust before it can be formally submitted. Since Daniel's stake is now part of that trust, and since the trust documents stipulate a 90-day deliberation window for any action initiated by a non-trust shareholder. He smiled pleasantly. Your board meeting request is legally suspended for 90 days. 90 days. Long enough for my father to restructure the equity, push through the consolidation without my consent, and legally dilute my stake below the controlling threshold. I looked at my father. He had the same expression Daniel wore when we were children, and he had managed to redirect punishment for something they had both done onto me alone. Quiet satisfaction. The pleasure of the trap closing. You've been planning this since before the wedding, I said. We've been protecting our family, my mother said softly from beside him. She touched my arm. Maya, this is not personal. This is about legacy, about what your grandmother built, and what we owe to the next generation. You have your art. You have your projects. Let us have this. There it was. Dressed in tenderness this time, but the same sentence they had always said to me, in different arrangements of the same words. You have enough. Let us have the rest. The mathematics of a family that had always treated me as a rounding error. I looked at my mother's hand on my arm. I thought about being 23 years old in a 58-degree kitchen, eating noodles from a paper cup, watching my savings drain into a dream that no one in this room had believed in. I thought about the phone call she had not made, the door she had not opened, the 12% my grandmother had left me that my father had spent 7 years trying to legally absorb back into his control. I thought about the afternoon 2 years into Lumen Studio when I had called Daniel, not to ask for money, not to ask for a referral, but simply to tell him that something I had built was working, that I was proud, that I wanted someone in the family to know. He had said, "That's great, Maya. Hey, is Dad on the other line? I've been trying to reach him." I had sat with the phone in my hand for a long time after that. I understand, I said to my mother. She let out a slow breath of relief. I understand, I said again, that you have spent 27 years assuming I would never be a problem. That you looked at me and saw a ceiling so low it barely registered. That every time I reached for something, you found a careful, loving way to explain to me why it wasn't mine to reach for. I stepped back, gently removing her hand from my arm. I want you to know that I am not angry about it anymore. I was angry for a long time. But anger is expensive, and I've learned to be very careful about overhead. My father started to speak. I continued. The 90-day consent window is a real obstacle, I said. Grant drafted it well. I had my own attorneys review a copy 3 weeks ago when our due diligence flagged the trust formation. I watched Grant's composure fracture. Just slightly, at the edges. So, I didn't file the board meeting request through the standard shareholder channel. I reached back into my bag. I filed it through a different mechanism entirely. Meridian Group is also a primary lender to Hargrove Capital. Has been for 14 months. You approved the debt facility yourself, Dad. Meridian Capital Solutions, LLC. It was in the board minutes for March. I set the second document on the table between us. A lender with a controlling debt position has independent standing to call a creditor rights review, which supersedes the family trust's consent window under Section 12 of the operating agreement your own attorneys wrote in 2019. I tapped the page. The review convenes Friday, not Monday. Friday. The silence was different from the last one. The last silence had been the silence of shock. This was the silence of people in a room who have just realized that the door they were guarding was never the only door. My father looked at Grant. Grant looked at the document. Whatever he found there confirmed what I had said, because he stepped back without speaking. You can still contest it, I said. Your attorneys are excellent. They'll find something to argue and it may delay things by weeks, possibly a few months. But Meridian owns enough of the debt structure that any prolonged legal conflict will trigger a covenant review. which I looked at my father directly, given the current leverage ratio on the Q3 books, would not go well for you. My brother had crossed the room. He was standing at the edge of our small circle now, his jacket open, his bow tie loosened, his face the particular white of someone who has just understood something he cannot undo. Maya, he said. What are you doing? I'm having a business conversation, I said. I'm sorry it's at your wedding. I genuinely am. I wanted to do this Monday. Dad moved the timeline. She's trying to take the company, my father said. His voice had gone rough. The polished boardroom certainty was gone. Underneath it was something I had not heard from him before, something that might have been fear. She's trying to tear apart everything we built. I'm not tearing anything apart, I said. I'm the majority stakeholder. I want the company to succeed. I have significant financial incentive for it to succeed. I'm not your enemy. I looked around the circle. My mother, my brother, my father, the attorney who had been positioned behind a pillar, all of them looking at me with expressions that existed somewhere between fury and incomprehension, trying to locate the Maya they knew inside the woman standing in front of them. She wasn't there. She hadn't been there for years. They had simply never looked closely enough to notice. What do you want? My father said. It cost him to say it. I could see the cost on his face. A seat at the table, I said. A real one. Not table 14 by the kitchen exit. I want board representation. I want transparent dividend distribution. I want an independent audit of the last 7 years of financials. I paused. And I want an apology. From all three of you. Not tonight. I don't need it tonight. But at some point, when the lawyers have finished and the documents are signed and we are sitting somewhere quiet, I want one honest conversation where you tell me that you saw me, that you always saw me, and you chose anyway to make me small because it was easier than making room. My mother made a sound that was either a suppressed sob or the beginning of a sentence she decided not to finish. My brother looked at his shoes. My father said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, You're serious. I am always serious, I said. You just never noticed. I had expected him to argue. I had prepared for an argument. I had a folder in my bag with 3 additional legal instruments and my attorney's cell number on speed dial and a very calm, very thorough response to every objection I had anticipated him making. He didn't argue. He sat down. Not in a chair. He simply sat down, straight-spined, on the edge of the nearest table, as if his legs had made a decision his pride hadn't caught up with yet. He set the documents beside him. He looked at his hands. Your grandmother knew, he said finally. She said you were the one. I told her she was sentimental. I didn't say anything. She left you the shares on purpose, he said. Not as a gift. As a test. She wanted to see what you'd do with them. He looked up. I spent 7 years trying to buy them back, because I knew. If you ever figured out what they were worth as a vehicle, I wouldn't be able to stop you. He let out a slow breath. I should have made the phone call. It was not an apology. But it was the most honest sentence my father had spoken to me in 27 years, and it landed with more weight than an apology would have. Yes, I said quietly. You should have. The string quartet had stopped. Around us, the wedding guests had noticed something happening in our corner of the ballroom. The way guests at any event eventually notice when the gravitational center of a room shifts. People were watching without watching. The polite performance of noticing without acknowledging. Serena touched Daniel's arm. He straightened. He looked at me the way he had when we were children, before he had learned that it was easier to align with power than to question it. For a moment he looked like someone who might say something true. I didn't know it was this bad, he said. I know you didn't, I said. That's also something we can talk about. Later. I picked up the folder from the table. I closed my bag. I looked at my mother, who was standing very still in her silver dress with her hands clasped in front of her, her expression composed into the beautiful blankness she deployed when she did not know what else to do. I'll have my attorneys reach out Monday morning to begin the transition process, I said. The creditor review on Friday is a formality. I'm not trying to destabilize the firm. I want to grow it. I looked at all of them in turn. I know this isn't what you planned for tonight. I'm sorry for that. I genuinely wanted to be here for Daniel. I still am. It's still his wedding. I turned and walked toward the ballroom doors. I didn't run. I didn't rush. I walked the way I had learned to walk through rooms that were not built with me in mind steadily, without apology, as if I had always belonged there. Because I had, and the only thing that had ever been wrong was that I had spent too many years waiting for permission to act like it. My attorney called before I reached the elevator. I let it go to voicemail. I'd call him back from the car. The lobby was quiet at this hour. The marble floors reflected the overhead lights in long, liquid rectangles. I sat down in a chair near the front windows and looked out at the city. It was a clear night. The kind of night where you can see farther than you expect to. My phone lit up. A text from a number I didn't recognize. Then I looked more closely. It was Daniel. Can we talk? Not about the company. Just, can we talk? I stared at it for a long time. Then I typed back, yes, give me a week. Then yes. I set the phone face down on my knee and looked back out at the city. 3 years ago, I had sat alone in my car outside a building where I had just pitched Lumen Studio to investors who didn't believe in it yet, and I had thought, the only way this works is if you stop waiting for someone to tell you that you deserve to try. I had stopped waiting. I thought about my grandmother. About the 12% she had left me with the deliberateness of a woman who planned several moves ahead. About what it meant that she had seen it when no one else in the family had been willing to look. About the fact that I would never be able to tell her she was right. I thought about all the rooms I had sat in alone. All the phone calls that didn't come. All the tables by the kitchen exit. I thought about the diner in Columbus, and the 3 sweaters and the ramen, and the dream I had built in the dark, in the cold, without a single person in my family believing it would become anything worth holding. It had become something worth holding. I stood up. I picked up my bag. I walked through the lobby doors into the night air, which was cool and smelled like November and parking structure, concrete, and somewhere distant, something burning leaves. I had not lost a family tonight. I had renegotiated the terms of one, and for the first time in my life, the terms were mine.